Well, hello there, and welcome to my kitchen table, a place in most homes where we can sit with family and friends and just talk for hours, putting the world to rights, as my dad would say. I'd normally start off at this point by giving you some information regarding um, the place where the story originates. But this sorry excuse for a human being travelled all over the UK. He was mostly based in the Midlands, though, so I'll just say that's a fairly big area. I'll leave it at that. So if you're ready, take a seat whilst I tell you a story. Alun Kyte was born July 7th, 1964, in Tittensor. What a great name. Tittensor. It's probably not pronounced like that, but that's how it's spelled. In Stoke-on-Trent. He grew up in Stafford, which is about 15 miles or 24 kilometres from Wolverhampton, which is in the Midlands of England. He was said to be a sickly child as he suffered from severe asthma, and his family doted on him constantly. After leaving school, he'd done a series of odd jobs, and he was described as a loner. He was also said to have a violent hatred for women and a strange fascination with sex workers, although it was very rare that he was actually seen with a woman. Kite often lived in hostels and bed and breakfast hotels. He would regularly travel hundreds of miles across Britain, telling his acquaintances, yes, because he had no friends, that he was looking for work. His itinerant lifestyle allowed him to travel the country in order to scout out sex workers, his chosen victims. He would in particular frequent motorway service stations, and he would ask for services from the sex workers, then attack them and steal everything they had. He was a prolific con man. Any opportunity, couldn't help himself in involving himself in petty fraud in particular. He cheated car owners by claiming he had retuned their cars. Obviously, that was when he was working in a garage. He would frequently replace his own personal car by using the car of his would-be customers, uh, basically to trawl the motorways of the UK looking for women. He's known to have driven as many as 1,000 miles in one customer's car in particular, and then returned it to his unwitting customer. In January 1991, the Staffordshire newsletter reported that Kyte had been convicted of stealing more than £700 from his father's bank account to feed his gambling addiction. Kyte, then of Stafford, went on the run once his father had discovered the theft and was reported as missing prior to being apprehended by the police. During this time, Kyte was also convicted of deceiving a couple whose car had broken down, and he got £35 off them and told them he was going to get a spare part to fix the car and never went back. He also done a runner from a petrol station forecourt without paying for the petrol that he'd had. All gas station forecourts all have number plate recognition, so he picked them up no problem. He pleaded guilty to 2 counts of deception, 1 count of theft, and 1 count of making off without paying. He was also found guilty of failing to surrender for bail, and he was given 2 years probation. His defence claimed that following an examination by a psychiatrist, the clinician found nothing clinically wrong with him. So he was just an evil son of a gun. Kyte claimed to have remorse and stated, "I have given up gambling and enrolled in an addiction control centre." Yeah, right. Alun Kyte was apprehended due to the groundbreaking investigations of a wider police inquiry named Operation Enigma. This was launched in 1996 in response to the murders of Samo, Paull, Tracey Turner, and a very large number of other sex workers and vulnerable women. Alun Kyte was known as the Midlands Ripper. He's a double murderer, a serial rapist, a child rapist, a paedophile, and suspected serial killer. He was convicted in 2000 of the murders of two sex workers, and they were Samo Paull, who was 20, and Tracey Turner, who was 30 years old, who he killed in December 93 and March 94. After his conviction, investigators announced their suspicions that Kyte could have been behind a number of other unsolved murders of sex workers in particular across Britain in the 80s and 90s because he was a lorry driver. He was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years imprisonment for the murders of Paull and Turner. In December 1993, Kyte picked up 20-year-old sex worker Samo Paull from Birmingham's red light district. She was a single parent. She was reported missing on the 4th of December. She was missing for more than 3 weeks before her partially clothed body was found. She was actually noticed by a horse rider on New Year's Eve. Her body was lying in a water-filled ditch near a lay-by outside Swinford in Leicestershire. This was 38 miles, or 61 kilometres, from where she'd last been seen in Birmingham. The site was near junction 20 of the M1. Because of the remoteness of the location, there was no CCTV evidence, nor any people living nearby that could provide information. All of her possessions had been stolen. Detectives originally focused their investigations on her boyfriend. A key witness was a woman who had seen a man in a brown-coloured Ford Sierra car driving through Swinford in early December with a woman in the back seat who appeared to be dead. The witness had previously worked as a pathologist and had experience in examining dead bodies, so she knew what she was talking about. She said the woman was sitting bolt upright and had strange marks on her face. The car was covered in mud, and the driver appeared to not want to be seen, putting his hat down over his face. When Samo was found dead on the 31st of December, the witness insisted to police that the dead woman she had seen being driven around was indeed Samo Paull. On the 2nd of March 1994, Central Television Broadcasting actually did a reconstruction of Samo Paull's murder. Kyte saw the broadcast, and it fueled his desire to attack another victim. Shortly after the broadcast, he abducted 30-year-old Tracey Turner from Hilton Park Services on the M6 motorway. Turner regularly solicited customers from motorway service stations across the country. She was found dead the next day at Bitterswell, near Lutterworth, 52 miles or 83 kilometres from where she was last seen. Similarly to Paull, she'd been dumped near the M1 motorway, this time near to junction 19. She'd been raped, stripped of her clothing and strangled. She was dumped by the side of the road and was found about 6 miles from where Samo Paull had been found. Police concluded that she had been transported to the location by car. You know, these police officers are so bright sometimes, aren't they? And dumped at the side of the road by the killer. Initially, the police made no connection between this new discovery and the murder of Samo Paull 3 months earlier. The first suspect to be questioned was a man who was believed to have been seen speaking to Turner at the Hilton Park service station. His car's registration was checked out, and he was actually traced to Glasgow in Scotland. But after speaking to him, investigators found no evidence to link him to the murder, and he was released. 2 days after the murder, Kyte was seen at the service station, posing as a newspaper reporter. He told staff he was conducting an investigation into prostitution. Initial inquiries into the murder to Paull and Turner yielded very few clues, and Kyte was not apprehended during this period, actually for quite a long time. It's known that Kyte also attacked a second woman in 1994. That March, he again picked up a sex worker from the red light district in Birmingham and drove to a dark area before pulling out a Stanley knife, or a box cutter, and holding it to her neck. He ordered her to give him her belongings and remove her clothes. But when she begged for her life and told him that she was 3 months pregnant, Kyte just told her to get out the car and threw her clothes out after her. The victim reported the attack to the police. Kyte was not apprehended for this offence. In January 1995, Kyte, still not known to have committed the murders and attacks on women, pleaded guilty at a magistrate's court for 2 counts of theft. Having stolen a vehicle he said he was working on for a client, and stealing an £800 piece of welding equipment, after lying and claiming that he'd actually given it back to the owner. At that time, Kyte, recorded as being of Plant Crescent, Stafford, was also charged with a number of other petty offences. In December 1997, Kyte committed a violent attack and rape of a woman at knife point in Weston-super-Mare. The victim had been staying in the same hotel as Kyte and was attacked by him there that night. She managed to escape and report the incident to police. Police were dispatched to the hostel where they were and arrested Kyte. He was ultimately found guilty of the attack at trial in 1999 and sentenced to 7 years imprisonment. At the time, police in Britain were often ineffective or dumb shits at solving the murders of sex workers. The victims received markedly less sympathy from detectives. Their murders were rarely featured prominently in the media, and the sex workers were often blamed for making themselves vulnerable. In the 6 months after Paull's death, 4 other sex workers, including Tracey Turner, were murdered across Britain. Leicestershire police detectives asked for a cross-force investigation. Many of Kyte's crimes were committed across force boundaries, and there were often difficulties in running investigations in such crimes and in sharing resources between forces. The increasing number of unexplained deaths in the 90s eventually led to the creation in 1996 of Operation Enigma, which was intended to review the unsolved murders of the 207 women dating back to 1986. So 207 unsolved murders against women in 10 years. These were sex workers or vulnerable women, or women that could have been mistaken for sex workers. The operation was run by the National Crime Faculty in Hampshire and made use of tracking and data analysis techniques from Canada, as well as new forensic techniques which detectives hoped would upgrade crime scene samples. Enigma was one of the first steps towards a database for violent crime analysis, and many of its features influence modern day policing. Detectives concluded that many murders of sex workers in the 90s appeared to have been committed by the same person, and investigated the theory that a serial killer or serial killers could be at large. 14 murders were, in particular, said to have similarities, and Enigma concluded that up to 4 serial killers could be at large. Many of the unsolved murders, Enigma investigators were clustered in the Midlands and in Merseyside, my neck of the woods. Information was shared between police forces around Britain. Detectives concluded that the similar murders of Paull and Turner were likely linked. When Kyle was arrested in December 1997 for the attack on the woman in Weston-super-Mare, his DNA was taken as part of standard procedures when arresting individuals suspected of any crime. This DNA profile was uploaded into the DNA National Database in March 1998, which revealed a match to a sample taken from the scene of Tracey Turner's murder in 1994. Both Turner's and Paull's murder investigations were then reopened by the Enigma investigators. Kyte was interviewed by these detectives, who decided not to disclose that they had found a DNA link in order to see what his defence would be. He subsequently denied ever using sex workers. He denied ever having pretended to be a newspaper reporter at Hilton Park Services. But the police had him on CCTV doing exactly that. He then revealed that he owned a brown Ford Sierra car, the same type that had been seen by the witness transporting a dead body near to where Samo Paull was found dead. Soon after, Kyte was charged with the murders of both Turner and Paull. At trial, forensic experts stated that the likelihood of the DNA found on Turner belonging to anyone other than Kyte was 1 in 33 billion. How to work that out, I don't know, because there isn't even 33 billion people in the world. But anyway, Kyte's fellow prison inmates testified that he had boasted to the murders while imprisoned in 1997. They stated that he had told them that he had killed Turner because she laughed at him during sex. And it infuriated him. The prosecution asserted that the 2 murders were linked by type, origin and disposal. Kyte put in a last-minute defence that the reason his semen was found on Turner was because he had regularly used sex workers, despite his earlier declaration that he'd never used a sex worker. And he had had consensual sex with her, saying, you know how it's like. You meet people, you have sex with them, or a one-night stand, and you don't remember it. He was found guilty for both murders by unanimous decision. He was given life with a minimum of 25 years. In news media coverage of his offences, Kyte was then labelled the Midlands Ripper, in part because he was also suspected of having multiple other victims. Operation Enigma had investigated Kyte's potential links to some of the other 200 plus cases, and it was reinvestigating them. Because Kyte lived an itinerant lifestyle and drove across the country, it was believed he could have been responsible for other unsolved murders in Britain. In prison, Kyte allegedly boasted of killing 12 women in total, which the detectives in charge of the investigations into his 2 known murders said could be true. He is said to have stated to inmates that you don't pay for that kind of woman. What a horrible attitude. There were reports in the media that detectives feared Kyte could have more victims than Peter Sutcliffe. Peter Sutcliffe was the Yorkshire Ripper. After his conviction in 2000, Leicestershire police took the unusual step of issuing every police force in Britain with his details and a tape recording of his voice. Detectives in particular noted that Kyte was not yet known to have committed any attacks between 94 and 97, and stated that they suspected that there could be other unknown victims between these dates. There were several murders that took place while Kyte was known to have been in the vicinity, and it was revealed after Kyte's 2000 conviction that detectives were already planning to speak to him about such murders. Many were committed near motorways, or the victims' bodies were found near motorways, similarly to Paull and Turner. The murder victims announced by investigators as possible victims of Kyte were a lot. Now, there is a lot of them. But in particular, I would like to mention Julie Finlay from Liverpool. Because he knew the area, and he knew the area very well, where she was picked up and where she was dropped off, or dumped, I should say. I've actually done an unsolved video about Julie, but there were a lot. It's like 14 of them. In February 2023, Kyte was further convicted of historical offences against a 9-year-old boy, which he committed in a violent rampage and campaign of rape, indecency and threats, which began in the late 80s and continued for 5 years. Oh, that poor kid. Kyte was found guilty of 11 counts of abusing the 9-year-old boy in the 80s and sentenced to a further life sentence and ordered to serve a minimum of 10 years and 8 months. During the trial, jurors were told how Kyte gave the boy 50 pence after the first assault and threatened his family after each attack. Giving evidence, the victim recalled how he was at times strangled until he became unconscious and was so scared that Kyte would harm his family that he decided to get it over and done with. God love him. During cross-examination, Kyte, then 58, accepted that he was capable of extreme violence, but denied having harmed his victim. However, the jurors convicted him on all counts. Handing down the sentence at Nottingham Crown Court, Judge Nim Alshant, KC, that's King's Counsel, said it was a brutal attack on a young boy. She said, "You attacked him, punched him in the stomach, winded him. You then picked him up by the throat, putting him against the wall. And when he couldn't breathe, as he was suffering from asthma, you taunted him. You took an inhaler, offered it to him, and then drew it away." On several occasions during sentencing, which he attended by video link from HMP Rye Hill near Rugby, Warwickshire, where he was serving his first 2 life sentences after being transferred, he becomes eligible for to apply for parole in 2033. He's now imprisoned in His Majesty's Prison, Onley, in Rugby, which is in Warwickshire. As of May 2023, continues to refuse to accept his guilt for any, serious crime of which he has been convicted, except for one murder, which was verified by a DNA link, which he eventually accepted his culpability in. Well, that was really big of him. Thank you so much for letting me tell you this story, and thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And it's free to do, so don't hold back. Oh, and remember this. A smile is a facelift in anybody's budget. I've been Sue, TTFN.